Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to the final part of our series of videos focusing on crimes involving Craigslist. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, be sure to check those out first. We'll leave a link in the description below. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this. It really helps us to continue building the channel. With that out of the way, here is part 3 of 3 chilling crimes that were committed using Craigslist. On the morning of November 6th, 2011, 48-year-old Scott Davis eagerly arrived at a Shoney's restaurant in Marietta, Ohio. He was there to meet his new employer for breakfast before heading north to the 688-acre patch of farmland in Noble County, where he was to begin work as a caretaker. The position was supposed to be a fresh start for Scott. Just 4 weeks earlier, he had been living in South Carolina and running a struggling landscaping business until a surprise job opportunity on Craigslist had caught his eye. The post seemed like a dream come true. All Scott had to do was watch and feed a few cows, and he would be compensated with a 2-bedroom trailer as well as $300 a week. He would also get full run of the scenic property's amenities, which had been advertised as being overrun with game to hunt and was complete with a 3-acre pond stocked with fish. As if all of this wasn't perfect enough, Scott had been meaning to return to Ohio anyway. His elderly mother lived outside of Akron, and her home was badly in need of repairs. The man who had advertised the job, Jack, made sure to emphasize in the posting that this was the job of a lifetime for the right candidate, and that it wouldn't stay open for long. Somehow, out of the over 100 applicants, Scott had been chosen. After that, he had packed up all of his belongings, including his clothes, tools, and his prized Harley-Davidson motorcycle, into a trailer and hitched it to his truck, before setting off for Ohio. When Scott arrived for breakfast that morning, Jack was accompanied by a teenage boy that he introduced as his nephew, Brogan. Things started off well. Jack made plenty of conversation, talking about everything from his ex-wife to his church to his favorite foods. He also took special interest in the items that Scott had decided to bring along with him, asking him about the contents of his trailer. Scott enthusiastically replied that the trailer was full from top to bottom. Eventually, things turned towards the first item of business. The road leading to the property in Noble County had split, so they would need to repair it before Scott could bring all of his belongings along. He left behind his truck and trailer in a nearby grocery store parking lot and proceeded to ride with Jack and Brogan in their car to get a better look at the problem. Soon after, the men set out towards the farm, quickly veering off paved roads to more secluded forested areas with nothing but dirt roads and little to no cell phone reception. At some point, Jack told Brogan, who was behind the wheel of the vehicle, to drop him and Scott off where they, quote, got that deer the last time. When Brogan pulled over, Scott followed Jack into the woods, with Jack explaining that he had left some equipment over a nearby hill down by the creek that they would need in order to repair the road. Once they got there, though, Jack seemed like he might be lost and suggested that they head back up to the road. The men turned and began walking back, this time with Scott leading the way. It was at that point that Scott heard a click. He turned to find Jack pointing a gun at him and preparing to shoot him in the head. He managed to throw his arms up in front of his face right before the gun fired for the first time, striking him in the elbow. After that, Scott began to run for his life, heading deeper and deeper into the woods as more gunshots rang out behind him. Even though Scott was bleeding profusely, he didn't dare go back to the open road, fearing that he would be seen by his attempted killer. He hid for hours until just before nightfall, when he finally felt safe enough to look for help. Eventually, he arrived on the doorstep of a man who tried to calm him down and immediately called the police. Though Scott survived his harrowing ordeal, authorities didn't really know what to make of his story. Seeing his long hair and disheveled appearance, they initially assumed he might have been injured in a drug dispute. They became convinced that he was telling the truth about the strange series of events leading up to his attempted murder, once they found his truck and trailer full of belongings, exactly as he described in the grocery store parking lot where he had left them. However, little did investigators know, the man that Scott had encountered had done this before, and he would do it again. It turned out that the name Jack had been an alias. The man's real name was Richard Beasley. Beasley was born in Akron, Ohio in 1959 and spent most of his life there. He worked as a machinist on and off throughout his early adulthood, but his career was frequently interrupted by stints in prison. From 1985 to 1990, he was incarcerated on burglary charges in Texas, and in 1996, he was further imprisoned in a federal facility for a firearms offense. When he returned to the Akron area in the early 2000s, he presented himself as a changed man, a self-styled street preacher who had found God. Beasley was in a car accident a short time later that left him with permanent neck and back pain, and as he became more and more reliant on opiates to manage that pain, he slowly stopped working altogether. However, Beasley kept up his godly persona, becoming a familiar figure at local church Bible studies and volunteering at a soup kitchen. It was in this capacity that Beasley endeared himself to the young son of a man named Michael Rafferty. The boy's name was Brogan, and would eventually become Beasley's teenage accomplice. As the years went on, Beasley became a constant presence in Brogan's life, and something of a mentor. The two would attend church together weekly, after which Beasley would often take Brogan and his half-sister out for fast food, and give them what amounted to life lessons about religion, working hard, and the importance of staying away from drugs, even as Beasley himself strayed further and further away from his own teachings. By 2009, Beasley had grown even more unscrupulous. He founded what he pretended was a halfway house for reformed addicts and sex workers, cruising the streets of Akron at night and offering vulnerable people, especially women, a place to stay. In actuality, though, Beasley's relationship with his tenants soon took on a darker tone. Women who stayed at the house would later allege that Beasley effectively became their pimp, advertising their sexual services online and even driving them around the city to perform sex work. He also allegedly supplied drugs to the women to ensure that they wouldn't leave his halfway house. In February of 2011, Beasley was arrested on several charges and was briefly jailed. Upon his release, he knew that prosecutors were attempting to build a prostitution case against him, and he decided it was time for him to disappear. He concluded that the best way to accomplish this would be to assume someone else's identity. And what better way to lure in possible candidates than with the promise of an attractive job offer? Beasley eventually zeroed in on a 56-year-old man named Ralph Geiger, the former owner of a maintenance business who now was down on his luck and staying at a local homeless shelter. Beasley felt that Geiger bore enough of a resemblance to him to be a fitting victim for his scheme. Even better, he didn't seem to have any family, and his poor economic prospects meant that he was unlikely to be noticed if he simply disappeared. Beasley invented the caretaker job on the fake farm, offering the position to Geiger. When he accepted, Beasley and Brogan Rafferty drove him out into the same wooded area where they would later take Scott Davis, and shot and killed him. After the murder of Ralph Geiger, Beasley assumed his identity as planned, but soon found that full-time work no longer suited him. In need of money, and because his first crime had gone so smoothly, it seemed it was only natural to kill again. It was at this point that Beasley decided to broaden his pool of victims, and posted his fake farm caretaker job on Craigslist. Over the next 2 months, Beasley conducted interviews with many men, corresponding and meeting with potential victims with disturbing frequency. Unaware that they were interviewing for their own murders, many men who didn't get the supposed job were left baffled by Beasley's seemingly inscrutable criteria. He would often abruptly end interviews if his potential victims mentioned having a family, and on one occasion, a man never received a call back after mentioning that he had martial arts training. Little did they know that Beasley was looking for vulnerable single men, the kind he thought he could safely eliminate without people asking too many questions. The first of these men was 51-year-old David Paulie, a divorced and unemployed former warehouse manager from Norfolk, Virginia, who had spent the last couple years living in his brother's spare bedroom. Like Scott Davis, David was immediately pulled in by the prospect of the solitary living and steady work offered by Beasley's fake Craigslist ad. Heartbreakingly, when David got the news that he had been chosen for the job, he excitedly told everyone he knew, saying that it was the opportunity he had been praying for. He met Beasley at a breakfast restaurant not far from Marietta, Ohio, on October 23rd, just 2 weeks before Scott Davis. Sadly, unlike Scott, David did not manage to escape with his life. However, it turned out that Beasley had severely underestimated the amount of people that David had in his life. In addition to his brother, his twin sister Deb and his best friend Chris Mull immediately noticed when they stopped hearing from David. Chris especially found this suspicious since he lived in Ohio, and David would actually be closer to where he lived once he had taken the job. The two friends talked every day right up until David met with Beasley. After that, he was never heard from again. Chris eventually managed to get in contact with Beasley, who he also believed was named Jack because it was the name he had given to David. Suspiciously, the man told Chris that David had taken a new job in Pennsylvania and had left his farm almost immediately after arriving. It finally became clear what had happened to David once his sister Deb came across an article a few weeks later about the attempted murder of Scott Davis. She immediately contacted the local police. After receiving the call, police began to realize that they could be dealing with a serial killer. As part of their investigation, they sent cadaver dogs into the woods to search the area where Scott Davis had been shot. Not only did they find the remains of David Paulie, they found a second empty grave, which had obviously been intended for Scott. Thanks to surveillance footage outside the breakfast restaurants where Beasley had been meeting his victims, police were able to identify him. They also traced the IP address of the computer that had been used to post the Craigslist ad, leading to a small house in Akron. The occupant of the house said that Beasley had been staying with him, but that he had been using the alias Ralph Geiger during his time there. He had since left town, but had left behind a cell phone number. Police had the man call Beasley and kept him on the line long enough to trace the call to another residence in Akron. On November 16, 2011, the FBI SWAT team arrested Beasley. Tracking down Brogan Rafferty proved to be even easier, considering that Beasley hadn't even bothered coming up with a fake name for him. They found out where he attended high school and questioned him there before taking him into custody. The teenager turned out to be a major key to the rest of the investigation, providing the police with detailed accounts of the crimes that he and Beasley had committed, as well as Beasley's motivation: to assume his suspects' identities and steal their belongings to sell as a means of making money. Sadly, police arrested Beasley just 3 days too late to prevent the death of his fourth and final victim. Brogan Rafferty would tell investigators during their interviews with him that on November 13th, exactly a week after the attempted murder of Scott Davis, he and Beasley had met 47-year-old Timothy Kern at a pizza place in Canton. Just like Scott and David, Timothy had been lured by the Craigslist ad and then vetted by Beasley to make sure that he met his murderous criteria. However, Brogan told police that by this time, any pretense of necessity in Beasley's killings had gone out the window. Even though it soon became clear through talking to Timothy that he had nothing of value to steal, Beasley decided to murder him anyway. He had also completely thrown caution to the wind. Instead of driving out to the middle of the forest like they had with previous victims, Beasley had Brogan drive them to a thinly wooded area behind a mostly defunct mall in Akron. Once there, Beasley had shot Timothy 5 times before burying him in a shallow grave. Before his trial, Brogan Rafferty was offered a plea deal that would have allowed him to qualify for parole by the time he was middle-aged if he agreed to testify against Beasley. He initially accepted, but backed out of the deal before his trial. It turned out that the statements he had given to police, along with the evidence that they already had, were more than enough to convict both men without his testimony. In November of 2012, Brogan Rafferty was convicted of 24 criminal charges, including murder, robbery, and kidnapping, for his role in the brutal crimes. The judge in the case stated that while he had been dealt a bad hand in life, he had chosen to embrace evil, and he was sentenced to life without parole. In March of 2013, Richard Beasley was convicted of the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Paulie, and Timothy Kern, as well as the attempted murder of Scott Davis. He was subsequently sentenced to death. Though this was later appealed due to a procedural error during his sentencing, a court reaffirmed his death sentence in September of 2020. That brings us to the end of our list. Do you know of any other cases like this that you think we should check out? Tell us about them in the comments section below. As always, if you enjoyed our video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. Thank you for watching.